Casey?
That's messed up. That's messed up.
Did Casey just go into savage mode?
That's the first word Casey's ever said, and now
said
he decides
Andrew.
to use it on him.
Yeah, he went Andrew. Wait, what did he say?
The
Oh.
3 words that Casey said the entire semester.
Casey, why you gotta do us so cold?
Casey.
Wow.
Why he's my face?
All right, so this is, I believe, where we finished yesterday.
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
As long as Hayden says we're good, we're good. All right,
This one.
so we got your nominal wage, got your price level. Your real wage is the nominal wage relative to the price level. And yes, this is right where we finished because we talked about how if Jared were to give his employees a raise, they'd have to be twice as productive. Is that likely? I mean, think of those of you who have a job. I'm guessing that some of you don't work real hard, but some of you probably work pretty hard at your jobs. Could you be twice as productive?
If I was getting
I
paid $15
literally
an hour, okay.
Snapchat most of the time on it.
If I, as a
It
teacher,
was Jared.
if we figured my wage based on productivity, I suppose it would be numbers of students taught per hour, right? Are there limitations on how much more productive I could be?
Yes.
Like the size of the classroom, the amount of time available to grade and assess? Okay, physical capital. Now, if I were a college professor and had a lecture hall with 500 seats, I could be bringing in bank. But it doesn't work that way. College professors don't get paid well either. All right, so we have what's called a classical dichotomy. What's a dichotomy? AP students.
Two.
Is there like a contrast between two things or something like that?
Yeah, it's when something should make sense, but it doesn't. It's a what? We've got a theoretical separation of our real variables and our nominal variables. But why do we say that separation is just theoretical? Can we actually separate our real and nominal variables? It's the same people doing the jobs. Okay. The classical economists, the old school guys, say can't actually say that monetary policy affects real variables. They said monetary policy only deals with the nominal. Think for a second. This is getting kind of deep. It's not that deep? Then explain how monetary policy can only deal with the nominal and not impact the real. Doesn't monetary policy cause inflation?
Or like increase minus pi, raise inflation over time. Like wages, real wages is the same no matter what. As an example of how it doesn't affect the real.
Okay. So Jared just said Hume's right. Anybody want to argue the other side?
In the long run. In the long run.
In the long run.
That's the key.
It is actually the key. If they change the money supply, the real variables, or the nominal variables will change. But the real variables don't. Because remember, the real variable is what? What's the nominal variable? What's the equation? W over P. P is the price level. Is that a nominal or a real variable? Nominal. So how could monetary policy affect real variables if there's no real variable included in the equation? So it should be pretty concrete, right? Is it? Why not? Economics is just quicksand. It's actually pretty concrete. Yeah. Alright. So let's look at the idea that money supply doesn't change real variables. We have a name for that idea. It's called money neutrality. The idea that money is neutral when it comes to real variables. Vocabulary and its proper application will be of significant importance in this chapter. If you are discussing this issue and you do not say or do not write money neutrality, count on losing points. It cannot be more blatant than that. Say what?
You'll get it right every time.
No, you won't necessarily get it right every time if you write money neutrality if you're supposed to be writing something else. But if you're discussing this concept and you don't write money neutrality, I'm gonna bust you. So would the AP graders. All right, so doubling the money supply causes nominal prices to double. What happens to relative prices? When you put actual numbers to it, does the relative price actually double?
No. It's the same. There's 30 over 20.
Yeah.
The multiplication and division just undo one another. Yeah. The relative price doesn't change because math. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So now are we ultimately convinced that Hume and the other classical economists are correct? That money neutrality is real, that the classical dichotomy exists?
Yeah, but you're about to bring up something that makes it not believable.
Do you think?
Quicksand.
Yeah.
Okay, the real wage stays unchanged. So the quantity of labor supplied isn't going to change because the price of labor didn't change. Right? We're going to stay at equilibrium. Quantity of labor demanded isn't changing because the price of labor didn't change. So employment doesn't change. So productivity shouldn't change either, right? For output. Even as prices go up, we don't start using more stuff or earning more money. So prices go up, we don't change output or productivity.
So why do people advocate for a higher minimum?
Haven't we already established that people who advocate for a higher minimum wage don't understand economics? I thought we resolved that one several months ago. Right.
It's like solve the world's problems.
And Gavin, the bottom line for that is there's a difference between the economic brain and the human brain. And even if you understand economics, you still want people to be able to live a decent life.
Yeah.
And so the people who think with their hearts want to make them better off, despite the fact that, and generally, the folks who strongly advocate for it don't understand the economics of it. All right. So Hume stands on pretty solid ground. no quicksand for him. Now, what Jared said earlier about this being a long run issue is accurate. In the short run, quicksand. Because we react in the now. And remember what we established, I think last semester, that it takes us time to adjust to changes, and then in the long run we end up back at equilibrium. By the way, who's Jerome Powell?
He's the new chief of the Fed.
Chair of the Fed. For the other 25 of you, that's a name you should know for the rest of the semester here. Why did I bring Jerome Powell up today? And it's not because we're talking about the Fed.
I was about to say that.
What did Jerome Powell do yesterday? Jerome Powell and the Fed
It was his first time like speaking or doing something. I can't remember.
announced that they're raising
Interest rates.
interest rates and will likely do so twice more this year. So start saving, make your money work for you.
Start putting money in a bank account.
Saving, not just a bank account,
I don't have
a
any
saving.
money for what you get a CD. Nope.
Ask your parents.
Yeah.
Grandma.
All right,
Did you say ask your parents?
Get an allowance.
That was the most privileged thing I've ever heard.
No. You don't have a job, how are you getting
the
money?
velocity,
I can't have a job.
the velocity of money. Now we're doing physics and econ?
Ew,
This is
no.
awful.
Can I get a drop
Where's
slip?
that drop
Yeah.
slip?
Where's your drop slip? I need
Yeah.
one.
I just got out of there.
Gotta lost touch with money.
Ew.
Share.
Lost my
Velocity
together.
What is the centrifugal acceleration?
Well, we've actually talked about centripety. Centripety? Centripetal
Stop it.
forces in relationship to
Stop
the
it.
circular flow.
Thank you.
Right? Money has a velocity. Have any of you ever heard of the website Where's George?
No.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, we
Yes,
track
where you
your
can follow
dollar.
your money. Yeah.
You can
If
follow
you
your
ever get a
dollar.
bill that says Where's George on it, go to where'sgeorge.com or there's an app. You can put it in and it tells you where that bill was last entered and how many days it's been, and it tells you the rate at which it's traveled. We entered several bills during winter concession season. Some of them had moved at the astonishing rate of like 1.25 miles a day. One of them came from California, 2 of them came from Columbus, Nebraska. Velocity of money. How fast does money change hands? I had a $5 bill in my pocket this morning. I paid for breakfast. I now have 3 ones. Somebody else had those ones this morning. The odds that somebody else had those ones yesterday. The odds that somebody will have these ones tomorrow, and that they're not all the same someone,
She knows
is
space.
talking about the velocity of money. Right? We're getting all mathy here. There's a formula for the velocity of money. Yes, you'll have to know this. There is no formula sheet on the AP exam. If you can remember that price level times real GDP gives you nominal GDP, and remember that dividing that by money supply gives you velocity, you're set. Otherwise, you're just sitting there looking at a bunch of letters on the board. Oh, Andrew, if you get a tattoo of all of the equations,
They should just.
I bet you
give
can
the AP
forget which
credit.
equations were
no, they'll
which.
probably flay you before you go in to strip you of those equations.
You know, I thought about getting
No,
like
flag.
we're in
So
World
remove
Civ,
the
I used to
flag.
think about getting the maths.
It's not full A.
No,
That's carving you up into steaks.
That's what
too fatty. Too fatty.
make it nice.
All right. So let's look at the velocity of money relative to pizza.
Made a rule
Bless you.
yesterday. We didn't talk about pizza.
Now we have to eat pizza.
In 2012, we've also talked about how difficult it is to get pizza at 10 in the morning.
It's really not.
In 2012,
Easy.
our real GDP consisted of 3,000 pizzas. What an economy, right? I don't want to live in this country. 3,000 pizzas. Well, it's a small country here, Hopelandia.
We get 3,000 for all of us?
In 2012, our output was 3,000
Wait,
pizzas.
output or?
Consumption. Our consumption was 3,000 pizzas.
We ate all
That's a lot.
So obesity, so.
I already had 5 pizzas.
Yeah, being
All right.
on the wall.
Those 3,000 pizzas cost us $10 a piece.
A pizza.
So what was our nominal GDP in 2012? 30,000. Okay. Our money supply was 10,000. So what was the velocity of money in Hopelandia in 2012? 3. There is no unit.
So it's just 3?
It's unitless. The velocity of money was 3.
Wait, so how do you put that on the
Wait.
say like money?
I'm about to get you there.
3 miles per hour.
Okay, what's your
per
velocity?
second per minute.
4.5.
Money.
That's how you put it in the context.
3
You said
transactions.
transactions.
A what? A day?
A pizza. I was just using 3 transactions.
In 2012.
Oh, okay.
So could the unit be transaction?
Essentially, yes.
We appreciate
We're so
that,
used to
like,
units, you can't tell us we can't.
No.
Well, Aiden satisfied himself. He said,
Ugh,
he's gonna
crazy.
I missed it.
I didn't-
said he's going to call it 3 transactions. Making transactions. Practice time!
One year. I heard you say one.
Corn is our good.
Corn.
Corn is good.
Wow, how great.
Bushes.
800 bushels of corn. Velocity is constant.
I hate both of
He
you.
said, "Ah, shucks."
What was the nominal GDP in this economy in 2008?
Oh, jeez.
4,000.
4,000. What was the velocity?
2.
2.
Constant. Wait, is that constant?
Boom! Y'all are so smart.
Man. Yeah, it's gonna get way harder on quiz. It's gonna be 4.2.
Yeah, I think we can do 4.3. Oh,
Look at how nominal GDP has grown so rapidly since the 80s. That's phenomenal nominal.
Phenomenon.
Look at how M2 moves in relationship to nominal GDP.
Makes it worse.
You have to have money in the economy in order for it to grow. And the velocity of money has been remarkably stable. In fact, money even seems to have slowed. Why might money have slowed in that latter period? Well, look what happened to nominal GDP. If your economy isn't growing, the money doesn't need to move quite as fast. Your house isn't on fire, you don't leave it quite as fast.
And for like 5 years there, nobody never moved really slow. Just flattened out, just stayed in a steady rate.
All right. This is called the quantity equation. Because we started all of this talking about the quantity theory of money, right? You forgot that. I know you forgot that, Andrew. Stop looking at me like that.
It's just my face.
So, 5 easy steps, boys and girls, to the quantity theory. 5 easy steps to the quantity theory. Start with the quantity equation. V times M equals P times Y. V times M equals nominal GDP. Velocity times your money supply. You have to assume V remains stable. That's a fair assumption, even though we live in quicksand land economics.
Because wouldn't it be stable in the long run?
Yeah. Velocity of money is stable. Change in M is going to cause nominal GDP to change by the same percentage. Always. Because math. That's what we reasoned out a few slides ago. That's that whole real not being impacted thing, the classical dichotomy. Raise your hand right now if you're sitting here thinking, I'm so lost, but I hope I'll figure it out later. Okay, well, you're a brave soul to admit it. You haven't read the book chapter and you weren't here yesterday. Then read the chapter over break.
You wasn't here the week before that.
I did.
on the boat.
I did bring my back.
The boat.
I guess you can still read on
You throw
Oh,
so
I guess so.
All right. Change in the money supply doesn't affect real GDP because money is neutral. And GDP is determined not by money, but by what we've got and how we use it. Resources and technology. So price level is always going to change by the same percentage as nominal GDP and money supply. With all of that laid out, the logical conclusion is that rapid money supply growth causes rapid inflation.
So when M goes up, P goes up,
Yup.
but Y stays the same.
Yup.
Makes sense. And P stays the same.
But nominal GDP will blow up by the same amount because it's a nominal. Phenomenal. So now you've got these 5 easy steps. Guess what? Practice time!
Yeah. Oh, there's our corn.
We're back in the corn economy. The numbers are the same. What was our velocity? 2. Oh my goodness, the Fed increased the money supply.
Yeah, fans.
So now we're dividing 4,000 by 2,100. So what's nominal GDP in 2009?
About 4,000.
Still 4,000.
Yeah.
Okay. What's P?
$5.
Why do you know that?
Because it says it.
All I know is P is
Oh,
money supply changes,
by
so P goes up by
10%.
10%.
I need you to take this equation
5.25.
and use it over here.
Money supply goes
Let's write it out on the board. Okay.
So you got V has to
Y is 800.
V is 2.
We don't know P. we know that velocity is constant, and we had already calculated it as 2.
M is 21.
And they're telling us that M now is 2100. So 4200 equals 800 P.
Obviously, divide.
So we divide 800 into 4200. So the price per bushel of corn is now 5 1/4. So what's the inflation rate?
Wait, 5%. Yeah.
Explain to the non-math heads in here how you get that.
525 minus 5.
Yeah. Final minus initial divide.
So you have the now price minus the then price divided by the then price, which is 5 1/4 minus 5 over 5 equals, huh?
And 2%.
The other way you know it is because they increased the money supply by 5%, and we've already explained that money supply and inflation move together. Oh my goodness, we got some technological process. So we're going to increase our Y. Now we're growing 824 bushels of corn.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
So our velocity stays the same. Our money supply is 2100. Still don't know P, but now we're growing 824. So we have 4200 equals 824 P. So we divide 4200.
5.09 or 5.1.
5 point what?
1.
Price level is 5.1. What is the inflation rate with this technological advance? Have to do the math, right? What is the math? Somebody who's not a math head.
5.1 minus 5.
That is 2%.
It is 2%.
Hey.
So we're right so far. So far, so good. Yup. Yay! So as long as GDP remains constant, changes in the money supply will equate to changes in inflation. If GDP remains constant, and only if GDP remains constant. How often does GDP remain constant? Almost never, which is why I didn't want you to just automatically look and say it's 5% because that's how much money supply changed. Because when GDP does change, but what other math can you do? Money supply went up 5%. GDP went up 3%. So inflation, 2%. So what if money supply had increased 5% and GDP had grown by 6%? We would have deflation. We would have a drop in price levels. They would say our economy is growing too fast And we have to increase interest rates, which is what they just did yesterday.
Is that good?
They want to increase inflation. Slow the economy a little.
Is this so they don't like drop real quick?
Yeah, they're concerned that the economy is growing too fast.
Are they trying to like steady this out?
Yes.
Yeah, they don't want 2008 happening.
2008 didn't happen because we were growing too fast.
But I feel like they think they like happen at the same time. 'Cause it's only going up. It's got to go down eventually.
No.
Yeah, I know, but that's just how
Let's
bad
stay a
it's
steady
gonna
up
go.
for like 50
Well, no,
years.
because, yeah, that's correct. The business cycle exists. We expand, we contract, we expand, we contract.
Because that must be wrong.
All right.
Spaceship, it can stay afloat.
If real GDP stays steady, the inflation rate is going to equal the money supply, or the money supply change rate. Okay. If real GDP goes up, the inflation rate should be less than the growth rate of the money supply. If real GDP were to go down, we hope the Fed would immediately be contracting the money supply so that we maintain some inflation. Because some inflation, guys, is good. We want a little inflation, always. Okay. Bottom line, economic growth increases the number of transactions. Economic growth means there's more stuff out there to buy, more stuff for you to spend your money on. We want you to go do that economically. Okay? We need money growth to sustain more transactions. We like that idea. We need that money growth. If money growth causes inflation, and money growth is necessary when the GDP is growing, these three things are inextricably linked. Right? GDP grows, we have more transactions, we need more money for more transactions, more money equals more inflation. Right? It's a tangled mess that you can't get away from. But there is a bad limit. Too much growth in money equals too much inflation. And too much inflation is bad. Too much inflation is especially bad in an economy like we have, where so many of our consumers who drive the economy are so in debt. They have made those transactions using credit and not currency. And as interest rates rise, the cost of borrowing that money rises. Money is now more expensive to the debtor, which means that you will see, for a logical debtor, a contraction in consumption. If you don't, then we grow ever closer to that tipping point where consumers quite literally cannot consume more because they have no more credit left. And yet inflation will continue on. None of us wants to see that.
If you borrow money and you're paying the interest rate and they raise the interest rates, does that raise your interest rate? Or is
So
it
the
not?
question for the stream is if you borrow money at an interest rate, X, and they raise interest rates to X plus 5, does your interest rate increase? The answer is it depends upon how you borrowed the money. The interest rate on my mortgage that I signed is not going to change because I signed a fixed rate mortgage. The interest rate on my credit cards, which I stupidly have used, will change because it is adjusted to the what is called the prime rate. So Mr. Powell's announcement yesterday is going to cost me more money
For the fixed, does that count for student
Yeah.
loans?
for the interest rate.
Are student loans
So
like this?
student loans are issued semester by semester. So if interest rates continue to rise, they said they're going to rise twice more this year. So your student loans that you take out in the fall, seniors, will be more expensive than the ones that current college students took out this spring. If the growth continues, next spring's student loans will be more expensive than the fall's. so on and so forth. When you graduate, you will have the option, depending upon whether your student loans were federal student loans or whether they were private, what kind of federal student loans, because there are different kinds, kind of private loans. You'll have an option to consolidate your loans. You want interest rates at the time that you graduate to be lower than they were while you were in college, because then you will consolidate. If the interest rates are higher when you graduate than they were for most of your time in college, you will probably not consolidate. You'll want to keep all of those separate interest rates. Now the banks are interested in you consolidating because they don't want to have to service 16 or 20 different, I'm sorry, not 16, 8 or 10 different loans. They'd rather service one, less overhead for them. So it's not an easy answer. But yeah, for those of you looking at student loan debt, these interest rates increases, that,
Let me take out my student loan right now.
what?
Let me take out my student loan right now.
You can't.
Why?
Because if you want federal student loans, which will have the lowest interest rates, as long as some legislation that's been proposed by the president doesn't go through, you have to legitimately vote.
What did they say you said?
Discontinue federal student loan program.
Why? Is it to help with debt?
Qualify.
Isn't that what Ben
No,
Bezos
because he
was
doesn't
talking
think
about?
that the taxpayer should be underwriting the education of the future. But
Did you see?
what do you know as economists?
The more
That's a
education you
The
have,
more
the better for
education you
your
have, the
economy.
more earning you have, the more earning you have, the more you can spend, the more the economy will grow. So if we cut the feet out from under,
Then your economy's not gonna be growing.
this is a graduate of the Pennsylvania School of Business.
So is it him coming up with it on his
Who knows?
Did you see that senator go off on Betsy DeVos?
Did you see what Senator Ben Sass said yesterday on the floor of the Senate?
own? No, what'd he say?
Look it up.
Bro, I was
Give us
Is there,
give us
is there
a
like
clue.
language
What he
that
said,
we
video
came here
time.
and-
Hey, has he shaved his beard yet?
Yes.
Fine. Did I tell you I wrote him an email about it?
Yes, you did.
so extra. And you don't have a job?
I do have a job.
Shave your beard.
I am. My razor died this morning.
All right. Hyperinflation.
I was like trimming a hair and I was just about to go to one side and it died. I'm like, thank God it did not die.
That would've been really funny.
It's a new fashion, so you could have seen if you started a trend.
I would have ran to Walmart and got one of those like dry shavers and like shaved it.
All noise.
Hyperinflation. What's hyper?
Fast.
Rapid, super rapid inflation. It's really bad. Zimbabwe had a hyperinflation situation. Germany, during the Great Depression, had a hyperinflation situation. This is when all the American history books we had for a while showed German children playing with blocks of Reichsmarks instead of actual building blocks because the money was worthless. Reichsmarks was the German currency. Yeah. Yeah. So when the government prints too much money, prices go up rapidly. So what happened in the German economy during the Depression, after World War I, they're paying off all of that debt to the rest of the world under the Treaty of Versailles. You remember this in your American history? Okay. So they didn't have hardly any economy left after World War I because Germany was destroyed. And their industrial land had been given to France under the Treaty of Versailles. So they didn't have any ability to create an economy. So they did the next best thing. They had to make their loan payments. So they made their loan payments. They just printed money to make their loan payments.
So is that like a
Money
dramatic?
that Mary had worthless.
When they printed all of that money, it ended up causing hyperinflation.
So is that like a dramatic version of quantitative easing here?
Yes.
Okay. No, it's just I talked about
Nice. All right.
So that's a conversation. Smart people.
The big catch here, the important words here are excessive growth. Excessive growth in the money supply always causes hyperinflation. The trigger is excessive growth. How do you know how much is excessive? Is doubling okay? But
50%.
so we shouldn't go doubling the money supply,
Why not?
because doubling prices would be
A bit too much mouse sellers.
going to be 100% legal.
See, you don't have to correct me.
Am I?
No, Sas.
Oh, I don't know.
I thought you said
Like,
hope. I was
this-
like, do
this
it. I
tweeze.
dare you.
Those are classic.
Go false people.
All right, large government budget deficits led to the creation of large quantities of money and high inflation rates. So Zimbabwe was tremendously in debt. So they printed more money. As they printed more money, prices went up. They couldn't afford anything to keep the government running, so they printed more money.
Smart.
Prices went up. They couldn't afford to keep the government running, so they printed more money.
Like there's a cycle there.
Zimbabwe runs on the Zimbabwean dollar. In August of 2007, the exchange rate, they got 245 Zimbabwean dollars for every single US dollar. A year later, that would be hyperinflation. A year later, I don't know what they're
That's not
No,
a
month.
Mega?
That's a month.
That's a
a month later, mega hyperinflation. Then by July, are we into mega hyperinflation?
Honestly, at that point,
Hey,
they're not even
question.
doing anything about
Question.
it. Too many.
So now it's down, or in 2009 went down to 340 for 55. So like, if you just kept all the money, all the Zimbabwe dollars, and then cashed them in like a year later, then you.
Except they're not stupid. What they did was they just negated everything and they said, we gotta hit the reset button. We're just starting over.
So they made new money.
Yes.
What
Dang.
the heck?
Read that sign.
No same dollars.
The money was so worthless
That you could use it for.
in the summer of 2008 that people were wiping their butts with it
That's pretty bad.
instead of trying to
There you
spend
go.
it.
I really, really.
Yes,
hate you.
Andrew, that was pretty crappy.
No,
This dude.
not allowed.
Think about it though. 26 billion Zim dollars.
Trillion.
That's brilliant.
Billion.
Oh, sorry, I can't.
I count commas.
I don't.
How could you buy toilet paper? You would be better off using currency in your pocket.
You mean a backpack or a truck?
Yeah. Wheelbarrow.
Imagine this.
In Germany, a wheelbarrow of money would get you like one little tiny shovel full of coal to try and heat your house. A wheelbarrow of money. So you didn't take the wheelbarrow to bring the coal back to your house. You took the wheelbarrow to take the Reichsmarks to get the little shovel full of coal. All right. So why do we call inflation a tax? Let's start there tomorrow since we're about to get out of here.
That's sad.
If you need your house with money.